Good morning, everyone, and welcome to John's Rants. This month, we're going to talk about the new forms that will be coming out in June. I want to give you a little bit of head start because there are a lot of forms. Not too many new ones, only a couple, but a lot of revisions, some of them very, very important. So let's get started. First of all, there's a form that just came out recently that is actually available. It's one of those rare forms that's issued between the December and June normal cycle, and it's a cash for keys form. What happened was there was a lawsuit up in Seattle, and the landlord entered into an agreement with the tenant with some cash for keys. The landlord performed, the tenant did not. The landlord sued, and the court held in favor of the tenant on a minor technicality, and sent shockwaves, frankly, through a lot of places because of the ruling. And as a result, C.A.R. went in and added a warning clause in the document saying that it is imperative before you enter into one of these cash for keys agreements using the form that came out in April, that you consider two things. Number one, seeking legal advice, and number two, considering taking a good, strong look at local ordinances, because what happened here is, although the parties had entered into a standard kind of a cash for keys, there was a local ordinance that the tenant took advantage of and the landlord was not aware of. And as a result, the landlord was out a bunch of money. So be very cautious when you enter into one of these cash for keys agreements. A lot of people are using them to try and get the property vacant when you're selling to a new buyer who wants to occupy the property. A lot of people are walking away from rent that's owed and using these cash for keys agreements. It's very, very important that you understand that before you do that, that you set up a scenario where the cash is paid when the keys are delivered, not that you pay the cash ahead of time and then hope that the keys will be delivered. Anyway, now there's three new forms that are coming out in June. One of them is related to the transactions, and two of them are related to property management. So let's talk about the one that's related to transactions. Let's say you have a transaction and you have mixed use. You have commercial, and then you have up to 4 residential units. It could be a large piece of property. The case that is the most important in California, it was a commercial transaction. There happened to be 3 houses on a large piece of property, and as a result, the buyer did not perform, and so the seller sued for breach of the commercial contract. The buyer set up the defense that there were 3 residential units on the property, and under the transfer disclosure law, Civil Code Section 1102, if there is a residential sale of 1 to 4 units, you must include a transfer disclosure statement. Because this was deemed to be a commercial transaction, the seller never considered doing a TDS, and as a result, the buyer, according to the court, continued to hold the right to cancel the agreement pursuant to the law that you are all familiar with, the 3 to 5 day rule. C.A.R. is going to solve that problem for you with the new residential units purchase addendum. This is an addendum to the standard purchase agreement that you can use if you have mixed use property, so that you will do a transfer disclosure statement, but it will be limited to the residential property under most circumstances. It's a good new form. got limited use only if you're going to sell a mixed use property with less than with 4 or less units on the property. I had a transaction about a year or so ago. My client was selling what essentially was a veterinary practice with a piece of property. The piece of property was primarily this particular vet specialized in horses. So there was a corral, there were stables, there was of course an incredibly large and very interesting surgical room, but there was a caretaker's cottage. And so out of an abundance of caution, we had the seller veterinarian utilize the transfer disclosure statement to avoid any problems going forward with that caretaker unit. And we've seen it happen periodically multiple times, and so be careful about that. There is going to be a rental property owner questionnaire. In December, they came out with a relatively substantial disclosure, and the disclosure was meant primarily for the broker, property manager, so that they would be able to know what the property contained, know what issues there were, and know what to do with the mandatory disclosures that are required in California, and so forth. But so what they're doing now is they're breaking that up, and now there'll be a rental property disclosure that will actually go to the tenant or prospective tenant of the property. So be on the be on the lookout for that. If you do property management, it's a good new form. They're also replacing the current pet addendum with a new animal terms and conditions. Remember that if it is a service animal or if it is a companion animal, they are deemed not to be pets under California law. And so as a result, you need to be really, really sure that the people that are coming in don't have a service animal or a companion animal. And under some upgrades to the law, you're now entitled to certain written confirmation from professionals regarding the companion animal. But again, the regulations that are part of the law in California are very, very clear and very strict. The good news is that in June, and I don't know the exact date, but we're going to have a housing symposium, and we're going to be bringing in the attorney for the Civil Rights Department that enforces all of this, and we'll have some questions for her regarding pets and animals and discrimination under California law. If you've got specific questions, get them ready, because come June, we're going to have a fair housing symposium, and one of the speakers is an attorney that actually enforces the law. But for C.A.R. purposes, there will be a new animal terms and conditions addendum to leases, and it covers all of the rules regarding pets, and you're going to want to take a good, strong look at that when it comes out. All right, let's talk about some of the revised forms that you're going to see. And again, I'm not going to cover them all, not going to cover all of the revisions to everything, but I wanted to highlight a few things. They're going to make a change to the assignment of the agreement addendum, so that in some cases, a buyer may assign his rights or her rights to purchase the property partially, and they're making a change to the assignment addendum. So if I want to transfer some, but not all of my rights to purchase a piece of property, I can do that under the form that comes out in June. So be aware that that will take place. They're going to make a revision to the buyer counteroffer and all of the other buyer counteroffers, as well as the seller counteroffer, the seller multiple counteroffer. And they're going to be putting in an explanation about the appraisal gap. As you know, The current RPA provides that the typical contingency that the property will appraise at or above the sales price, but because of the market, they included an ability of a buyer to offer a purchase price that is actually less than the appraised value. The trouble, of course, is when there are counteroffers and multiple counteroffers that could create a gap. So, for example, if I say I'm willing to pay the purchase price is 800,000, I'm willing to close the transaction if the appraisal is at least 775, which is a $25,000 gap. But what happens if we counter that 800,000 above that number? What happens to that gap? And so they're going to be providing a mechanism in all of the buyer representation, all of the buyer counteroffers, all of the seller counteroffers, that will be able to cover that. In the buyer representation form, which just came out in December, they're going to make an amendment, a revision, so that you'll be able to add some contact information over and above what's already there for the buyer side. So that's a good thing. They're going to be adding some language in the cancellation of contract and disposition of deposit form, so that there can be some more choices, that if the parties want to cancel the contract and the escrow but not necessarily return the deposit, there's going to be some additional changes and a partial release in the form. There is going to be a change to the disclosure information advisory, which I personally think is one of C.A.R's best risk management forms. That's the form that you would provide to a seller to explain what needs to be done to fill out the TDS, the SBQ, and so forth. And they're adding a paragraph that continues the trend to make it clear that the seller is to include any current or past reports or relevant documentation. So I remember, gosh, 10 years ago, the most common question we would be asked in any program we did was, what do I have to do about past disclosures that were reports that came out of a canceled escrow? And the answer continues to be, you provide them. And now they're continuing to enforce that. So just be aware. In most, if not all, but in most, and I believe the trend will be that sooner or later in all of the rental forms of any kind, they're changing the word landlord to housing provider. So in California, you will no longer be a landlord, you will be a housing provider. One of the places they're making that change in June is in the Fair Housing and Discrimination Advisory, but they're making it pretty much everywhere in most of the forms that deal with leases or rental agreements. They're making a change to the notice to buyer to perform, so that if you, let's say, for example, that I have 20 days to remove a certain contingency, and for whatever reason, the seller sends a notice to buyer to perform that is too early. Well, if that's the case, then the notice to buyer to perform is actually invalid. But what about all the other contingencies? So what they're doing is they're saying that an early delivery of a notice to buyer to perform is only invalid as to the contingency that the notice was meant to cover. Now, obviously, if you cover all contingencies, then it's invalid as to all contingencies. And when the appropriate time comes up, since it's a 2-day notice, that's 2 days from whenever the contingency is to run, is the earliest you can deliver a notice to perform, then you'll have to redo that. All right. They're making all of the listing agreements. I'm zeroing in on the exclusive because that's what y'all mostly use. But as to all of the residential listing agreements, They're making two changes. One has to do with smart home features, and making sure that if you are selling or listing a smart home, that you take certain action. The other, though, is to clarify that the seller is instructing you on how they want offers to be presented in writing. For example, if you are that it will default that you will submit offers as they're presented, but there are going to be places where you can choose either to hold all the offers to an express date or in a certain event. This way, if you don't present offers, which is covered by the Code of Ethics, you'll be able to show a written document that says the seller told me they want me to hold offers. You probably should point that out in the MLS to avoid confusion and to be cooperative with other real estate professionals. One of the most underwritten forms, one of my favorites as a risk manager, is the statewide buyer and seller advisory. And it is a 13-14 page advisory. It's not bundled normally with your standard disclosure forms. I wish it was. I wish you would send it. It covers just an abundance of topics, and they're going to be making some changes to carbon fuel appliances, to discriminatory covenants, and to fees and credits for solar power. But it covers so much more than that. I would urge you to take a good, strong look at it. We've been doing a lot of Barbara Bess, Linda Stefano, and I've been doing some buyer classes on the new CRBC, and included in that, we've been talking about how the seller could pay for the buyer's broker's shortfall if they've agreed to a certain amount of commission, and that's not what's being offered in the MLS. And there's a procedure, there's a form that's already been set up. We'll cover that in these classes. It basically says, number one, you have to have a BRBC, and number two, you have to have form number SPBB, which is the seller payment to buyer's broker, and number three, you have to provide for that in the initial offer by checking off box 3G. It's the only time you're supposed to use it, and they're going to make some changes to that in case so that it becomes a little clearer what you're to provide and how you're to handle that. So there's going to be a change to the seller payment to buyer's broker form. But again, it's a process, and I had a question the other day. The agent said, I check it off every time, and that is absolutely the wrong thing to do. It has very limited purpose, so be aware of that. They're going to make some changes to all the disclosure forms, the transfer disclosure form and the seller property questionnaire. Right now, it doesn't refer to which unit you're providing the TDS or SPQ for. At the top of both forms now, just below the title of the form itself. So transfer disclosure form, and then all the little writing that goes in there. There'll be a little line, and it'll say this form applies to unit number 1, 2, 3, or 4, A, B, C, or D. And so this way, it'll be clear that for example, if you have 3 units, you're going to provide 3 TDSs and 3 SPQs, and you'll be able to designate which of the units you are inspecting. That already exists on the AVID form, and now they're making that change to the SPQ and to the TDS as well. I have several cases right now dealing with teams that are breaking up, and who do you pay the commission to? What are the commission agreements? And so C.A.R. has its own team agreement, the TEAM form, and they're going to make some changes to that form. particularly paragraph 9C as in Charles, to make it clearer what happens to compensation between the team members if there's a termination of some kind. So I think whether you use the C.A.R. form, your own form, however you do it, you need to be crystal clear. What happens if a team member leaves? What happens to the agreement? What happens to any transactions where you have an active listing, an active sale, anything of that nature where money is involved, because people tend to have misunderstandings about what the agreement is relative to a participant of the team who actually leaves the partnership. All right. I'm not going to cover this time any of the property management forms. There's going to be changes to a whole bunch of them. We'll do that another time. We'll also cover that in a newsletter. Just be aware that you're no longer a landlord. You're now a housing service provider. And under that Seattle case, I want to make it abundantly clear to you that it is critically important, particularly in California, that you understand local ordinances and the like. So with that, this is John's Rants. Let me know. I've been told that quite a few of you actually watch these rants of mine. Let me know if there's a topic you want me to cover. We're going to continue to track what's going on with the antitrust lawsuits. Probably do one in the future on some issues we see with disclosure. But if you have a particular topic that you want me to do a deeper dive on, it could be a paragraph of one of the forms, it could be a section of one of the forms, it could be a particular topic, something that takes anywhere between 10 and 20 minutes for me to cover. I'd be happy to include you. Just let Lori Smith know. She's the professional standards manager for the association, and she'll let me know what topics she and I get together just before we have one of these scheduled. I go over the issues with her, what topics need to be covered, and I'm happy to do this. This is for you, it's not for me. So let me know what you would like me to cover. I'll research it, we'll get it covered for you. If I have to ask a guest speaker to come in because it's outside my area of expertise, I'm certainly happy to do that. So with that, this is John Giardinelli, Association Counsel, signing off and wishing you a pleasant day, and look forward to seeing you again down the road. Bye now.